Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Friday, March 3rd, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to read an article to you, portions thereof, from MedPage Today. It is an article that outlines how one doctor, Stella Immanuel, is or has become the highest U.S. prescriber of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. You would recall hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are the snake oil salesman version of how they ostensibly survive COVID-19. I say that because as studies have come out to show that ivermectin has more of an effect on someone having diarrhea than it does on impacting or helping them if they had COVID-19. That did not stop an entire cottage industry. And perhaps cottage industry is the wrong phrase when I give you these numbers, the numbers of prescriptions that she has filed over the last 2 years, a ridiculous amount of prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And as we do the math, you see that Stella Immanuel and her team potentially made a killing off of potentially killing people struggling with COVID-19 or people who trusted the so-called American frontline doctors and trusted her, Dr. Stella Immanuel. They trusted her with care. Now, I am not going to put so much of the onus on Dr. Stella Immanuel because, there were so many people at the beginning of this pandemic and even still now so desperate to I don't know what it was. I don't know that they were desperate to find a cure for COVID-19 because they were so trapped in the world that halfway denied that it even existed. This was the same group of anti-vaxxers who called this a plandemic. And people like Stella Immanuel, the so-called American frontline doctors, which they were not frontline doctors, that was just their branding. Okay, American frontline doctors is a branding tool, but it was a branding tool that gave the perception or the insinuation that the doctors that were prescribing ivermectin were actually on the front line. That's the kind of semantic games that are played usually by conservatives in this country. We see this all the time with how they name their organizations, but I digress. The point is this: tens of thousands of prescriptions by one person, by one doctor. Stella Immanuel has the highest U.S. prescriber of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And again, I'm reading from MedPage Today, and it says the following, quote, Stella Immanuel was the nation's top prescriber of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin over the past 2 years, a MedPage Today analysis of prescription data has found. In 2021, Immanuel wrote just over 69,000 prescriptions of hydroxychloroquine, vastly above the average of 43 prescriptions in the database MedPage Today reviewed. Rheumatologists, the article continues, have prescribed an average of 561 hydroxychloroquine prescriptions on average that year. Immanuel also wrote almost 32,000 prescriptions for ivermectin in 2021, well above the average of 15. That's over 100,000 total prescriptions for medicine that had no impact on COVID-19. The studies that have come out show now that hydroxychloroquine nor ivermectin had a substantial impact on treating people with COVID-19. But I want to continue reading from MedPage. Although her prescribing declined in 2022, Immanuel remained the highest prescriber of both medications in the U.S. last year, writing 30,996 prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine and 16,085 prescriptions for ivermectin. As for 2020, data were not available for the second half of the year, but for those 6 months, Immanuel was the highest prescriber of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin at nearly 10,000 and 1,500 ivermectin prescriptions, respectively. 10,000 of hydroxychloroquine and 1,500 of ivermectin, respectively. The figures came from an analysis of data from Symphony Health, which tracks U.S. prescription data by analyzing claims from both commercial and federal sources. While the database does not provide the specific indication for which the drugs were prescribed, sources believe that based on Immanuel's telemedicine operation, they were likely doled out for COVID-19 treatment and prevention. And that's the key, right? This was her brand. This was the brand not only of her by herself, but so many grifters. I'm trying to find the right word to describe that broad category of people who leaned in on the snake oil salesmanship of ivermectin. You not only had so-called doctors prescribing it, you had commentators who were propping up podcasters, YouTubers who were propping up ivermectin as a legitimate alternative to taking the vaccine. And of course, this is associated with her telehealth medicine platform, which I went online to her site, Dr. Stella MD, and I tried to get a consultation because I was curious about something. I was curious about how much each of these telehealth consultations actually cost. Because if you look at that $69,000 for hydroxychloroquine and some, what was it, $30,000 for ivermectin. If you look at those numbers and you look at just the sheer volume of it, your alarm should go off and tell you that this is merely a numbers game to get as many appointments as possible through the system. I mean, she clearly was not able to have actual appointments of people coming into her office and to do any follow-up to see how her prescriptions were even helping. I mean, she had enough patients to do an actual study on the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine and the effectiveness of ivermectin, but she could not maintain that kind of capacity, not as a single doctor. So it's a numbers game. And then I went to the site and I filled out the consultation form. It costs, you could go to the site and do it yourself. The last step of filling out this form, it costs you $285. $285 to have this consultation. So it seems to me that a person who is running a grift as potentially, as she is potentially running, I use potentially loose here, right? I say potentially because we can never know the true intentions of someone, and you have to be objective. But look at these numbers. You cannot tell me that this individual, we have to consider humanity. I mean, my God, the scam, the grift of getting people to prescribe to a medication that was not going to help them to the tune of some $285 per consultation. It looks like she had well over 100,000 consultations between 2020 and 2022. That 2-year period. I mean, my goodness, if the grift has never been as transparent as it has before, it's right there in plain sight. It's right there in plain sight. So many people used COVID-19 as an opportunity for them to get rich themselves, even at the expense of someone else's health, at the expense of someone else's life, because we have no data of how many of those people actually died thinking they were getting an actual treatment for COVID-19, who bought into the hackery of these so-called American frontline doctors who ultimately were just running a telehealth operation, trying to get as many numbers through the door, through the computer as possible, through the online appointment process as possible, trying to get as many consultations as possible. And on Stella Immanuel's site is $285. You do the math. There's an incentive there. There's always an incentive in this putrid system that we live for people to take advantage of the, I don't even want to call them skeptical, because it's one thing to be a skeptic who looks for data and tries to get confirmation through scientific methodology. That's what I call a skeptic. But in this case, they were grifting off of people who were terrified, scared of a vaccine, scared of the pandemic. They probably caught COVID-19. And instead of of, well, it was too late. Once you caught it and you didn't have the vaccine, it was too late. So they were desperate. We're talking about some people who were desperate for anything. And she prescribed to the tune of over 100,000 prescriptions, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. I want to continue reading from MedPage today. During the pandemic, controversial groups touted hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin as a, quote, miracle cure for COVID-19, even though study after study has consistently shown both to be ineffective for treating or protecting against the disease. Right there it is. Facts don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter to a whole segment of American society that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine were not effective. They were never expected to be effective, but they would rather get a $285 consultation with Stella Immanuel. If they could get an appointment out of the 100,000 people who are trying to get an appointment with her, they would rather do that than to go with science data-driven vaccines. That's because of the absurdity of our country. And then we have far too many people who actually are trained physicians and doctors and communicators and propagandists who literally use their platforms for the purposes of making as much money as they can with no regard to the safety, health, or even protection of their audience. What the thing about it is that we're dealing with people who would just as soon burn through their entire support base. Burn through their entire supply of human beings, of their entire set of customers. They would burn through the people that they need to feed them in the long run. We're dealing with an ideology that would literally kill you now, give you some bad medicine, give you medicine that doesn't do anything to help you while they're simultaneously attacking the vaccine, simultaneously telling you not to wear a mask, simultaneously telling you not to social distance, but they want you to go get hydroxychloroquine because they can get a kickback on that, and they can get an online consultation fee if you come in there and ask them for ivermectin. And for Dr. Stella Immanuel at drstellamd.com, you can go verify it for yourself. You fill out the paperwork and boom, there it is, your $285 fee. Now, I don't know how much if that's been the price the entire time that she's been doing this. But if that's been the price or anything near that the entire time that she's done this, then they have potentially made millions of dollars off of selling medicine that does not help with the pandemic. But there they were at the beginning, Stella Immanuel and the so-called American frontline doctors. There they were at the beginning of the pandemic, at the middle, and now at the end, collecting their checks because, somebody's got to pay. Not somebody, every person. Every person that got a consultation on their telehealth medicine site paid something. And if I had signed up today, the fee for me today would have been $285,000. Now, if that's the fee for everyone else, you do the math. For over 100,000 prescriptions over a 2-year period, she and her team potentially made millions of dollars off of prescribing something that really just made people crap in their pants from diarrhea, because ivermectin is a horse dewormer. And if there's no other story that perfectly demonstrates how ridiculous and how utterly absurd our reality is, this is the one. A new bill in Florida would require bloggers writing about Ron DeSantis to register with the state or be fined. If you want to know where we are in the decline and the stages towards fascism, we are now in the state of Florida going to be required. Anyone who lives in the state of Florida who is going to write about Ron DeSantis, the new bill would require them to register. I mean, come on, folks. It can't be too much clearer than this, where we are, the intentions of the conservative movement in this country. Okay, again, according to insider.com, and obviously other outlets are reporting this, a new bill introduced in Florida will require any blogger who writes about Governor Ron DeSantis to register with the state. The bill was introduced in the Florida Senate on February 28th by GOP lawmaker Jason Brodeur. SB 1316 would require any blogger who writes about DeSantis and is paid for their work to register with the State Ethics Commission or the Florida Office of Legislative Services. They must do so within 5 days of their first post. Bloggers would also be required to register with the state if they write anything about Florida's lieutenant governor, a cabinet officer, or any member of the Florida legislature, according to the bill. SB 1316 would mandate that bloggers submit monthly reports about their work if they write about elected officials, including how much payment they receive for their articles, rounded to the nearest $10, and the name of the individual or entity who paid them. Writers who do not file their reports on time should be fined $25 a day. The bill suggests a blogger can be fined a maximum of $2,500 according to the bill. Bordeaux's suggested laws do not appear to apply to news organizations, but instead to target individual bloggers who write about DeSantis and other officials. The proposed legislation has not yet been put up to a vote. You know, when you consider the different legislation that is being passed around the country, presented, introduced, and then subsequently passed, I mean, I would not be surprised if this bill passed. It's not as though Republicans across this country aren't passing bills that honestly are unconstitutional, and they're counting on a conservative Supreme Court to give them the stamp of credibility, to give them the stamp of constitutionality, even though these bills violate the Constitution. That's happening all around this country, whether it be in terms of the books that they're trying to ban, whether it be the Don't Say Gay bill in the state of Florida, whether it be all of the anti-trans legislation that's passing around the country. It's a firestorm of conservative activity for the purposes of using the federal government and state governments as a bludgeoning tool, as a weapon. They are weaponizing the federal government against people they don't like, against their political enemies, against their rivals, against anyone who even writes about them. The point of this is the chilling effect. The point of this is to scare away people from doing the reporting, from doing the writing. We saw this in the state of Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill. In particular, we saw it with the book banning list that Governor DeSantis supported. And we also saw it with Governor DeSantis's attack on diversity and inclusion. We saw it especially there because without any legislation, his just coming out and speaking against diversity and inclusion led to universities throughout the state of Florida canceling and dismantling the entirety of their diversity and inclusion programs. So it's the chilling effect that Governor DeSantis is wanting to have the most of, because then it just stops people from doing the writing in the first place, doing the journalism in the first place. This is fascism. I don't know how many more examples we need to realize what we're dealing with, but let's go a little bit further. According to MSNBC, quote, if this approach sounds at all familiar, it might be because Vladimir Putin signed a similar measure known as the Bloggers Law in 2014, requiring online writers to register with the Russian government. This is what authoritarians do. This is their mechanism of control. Also in the state of Florida, the Republican Party has presented a bill to ban the Democratic Party, the entire party. And if you are a registered Democrat, what would happen is that you would end up becoming a non-party affiliation. They want to do away with the entire party. They want a one-party rule. And for all the people who spent so much time screaming about the duopoly, I mean, we're literally moving towards a single conservative fascist party. But we're supposed to think that both parties are the same. No matter how you feel about the Democrats, it is absolutely clear that we're dealing with one party that, while they may be feckless and they aren't capable of actually accomplishing anything, you know, we can even argue about whether or not Democrats actually want to do something for us. That's a fair argument. And I think we should have that debate someday. But the reality of it is we have another party that is 100% committed to authoritarianism and fascism, and they're doing it in broad daylight.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions. Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Tonight is the live show for Like It or Not. I'll be live with DJ Exclusive and Rebecca Azor, and we'll be covering news and politics and all the different things that are important to us, as well as enjoying our live audience. So be sure to check us out at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight on the YouTube as well as Facebook. I want to play something funny for you before I get out of here. I want to play what happens when you get high on your own supply, when you have listened to your propaganda so much that you believe your own propaganda, you believe your own hype. Such is the case with Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, who was speaking at a conference and inadvertently or intentionally made the following statement, to which the entire audience started laughing. He made it seem as though Russia was the country that was invaded and forced into war. And again, this is what happens when you have been listening to your own propaganda so much that you forget that you are the one trying to sell lies to the international community. Listen in.
You know, the war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using Ukrainian people, of course, it influenced the policy of Russia, including the energy policy.
The war that was launched against Russia, my God, like the gall, right? Look, so let me take a second and take off the table the fact that it was a slip up and he really just kind of fooled himself into believing his own hype and lean into the idea that this is the Russian propaganda that is still being spread around the globe, especially here in the United States of America. The entirety of the so-called anti-war left has been absorbed into this type of thinking that Russia was somehow compelled to go to war in Ukraine because their hands were tied and they were under attack. And this is the nature. This is the pure substance of the propaganda that we're dealing with right now. At such to the point where we have people calling for peace by saying that the way to peace is for Ukraine to lay down and just take it, to just let Vladimir Putin do whatever he wants to them. So if I took off the credibility that I'm giving Sergey Lavrov by saying that it was a slip up and he's bought into his own propaganda, which is possible, right? It is totally possible that Lavrov said this fully believing that war was launched against Russia when in fact they are the invaders. Vladimir Putin is the aggressor. He is the cause of the war. He is why so many thousands and tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died and over 200,000 Russians have died. It's because of Russia and it's because of Vladimir Putin. But as I have said consistently throughout this war, had Vladimir Putin's troops, soldiers, been as effective as his propaganda, then perhaps Ukraine would have fallen by now. But such is not the case. As the moral arc of the universe would have it, the only thing that is effective coming out of Russia right now is its propaganda. It is so effective that the American anti-war left has been completely and totally co-opted by the absurdity of the notion that Ukraine is responsible for the war that Vladimir Putin launched against it. And so the propaganda is quite effective, so much so that I'm going to pause and say that Lavrov probably is buying into his own hype. He's in such a hermetically sealed bubble. Consider the absurd things that conservatives believe in this country. the absurdity of the things. I mean, we just got through talking about some 100,000 people who went to Dr. Stella Immanuel to get ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine prescribed to them for the pandemic. So there is a level of ignorance that is wrapped in the opportunistic nature of propaganda that people fall into on a regular basis. So yeah, it's completely and totally plausible that Sergey Lavrov said this honestly thinking that war had been launched against Russia versus Russia launching the war against Ukraine.
You know, the war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using Ukrainian people, of course, it influenced the policy of Russia, including energy policy.
I mean, he even had the nerve to say the war we are trying to stop. The easiest way to stop the war in Ukraine is for Russia to go home. Period. And anyone who tries to make an argument besides that, they are not arguing in good faith. You want to know how you stop someone from being assaulted? Stop the assaulter. You want to know how you stop someone from being maimed? Stop the person who is doing the maiming. You want to know how to stop someone from being brutally accosted? Stop the brutalizer. But we live in such a backwards society full of gaslighters and opportunistic grifters that they are willing to look you smack in the eye and say the way for peace in Ukraine is for Ukraine to lay there and take it. That's the audacity. That's the unmitigated gall of the propaganda that comes from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, all the way to your friendly neighborhood blogger, podcaster, YouTuber. I would suggest that you look at the overlap between the people who are trying to sell you ivermectin and the people who are supporting Vladimir Putin. The Venn diagram is probably at least 80% coverage. The same people who are spreading lies about COVID-19 and about the vaccine are the same people who are out here supporting Vladimir Putin, saying that the way to peace is for us to capitulate and to appease Vladimir Putin by surrendering to him. We are surrounded by bad faith actors. We have been surrounded by bad faith actors for some time. We have been led in this country by bad faith actors. In fact, this entire system around us that we are dealing with, that we live in, is constituted in bad faith. But that's a whole different conversation for another day. Tonight, again, like it or not, we will be live, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Facebook and YouTube. No bonus show for patrons tonight, for patrons right now. I'm going to be getting ready for the parties. You can see us live. We have a great time every Friday night, and you need to be there. Make sure you're in the place. And if you're not already, patreon.com/the BPD show. See you tonight.